Brandon Weichert, welcome to our show. Thanks so much for joining us. Now, Xi and Putin are deep in talks, in part over China's claims of seeking to support peace in Ukraine. What do you expect to come of these talks?
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I would expect a greater alliance to be born out of this new entente that's happening right now. This is not a minor or temporary thing. I know people in Washington, D.C., they've been hugely embarrassed by this, so they're trying to downplay it. This is not a one-off. This is the birth pangs of a new world order. It is a kind of an autocratic pan-Eurasian alliance that's being built with Beijing at the hub, as the hub of this alliance, but Russia is going to be a very important component of it. Russia has for years wanted to pivot to Asia. We've been talking about doing that in the United States. They've for years wanted to do that, Putin and his Siloviki, and now this is the perfect excuse. And so we can anticipate a new world order being birthed. It's not going to be American-led and unipolar any longer. It is now going to be multipolar, and Russia is basically signing on to become part of China's new growing Eurasian-wide empire. And so we can anticipate the Ukraine war will not end anytime soon. And if it does end, it will not be in Ukraine or NATO's favor. So this isn't really a sudden break per se. This is more of a coming out party. They've been planning this for years. It was just a question of timing, and now it's the time is now.
Xi and Putin signed an agreement to expand their economic ties today. We don't know all the details about that yet, but it could include plans for a gas pipeline from Siberia to China. What kind of effect do you think this partnership could have on international affairs? Well,
the economic system, the global economic system that America has shepherded since at least 1991, probably even before that with the end of the Second World War, because remember, the Soviet Union was never really integrated the way China is integrated today in our system. But it is now a bifurcated, at the very least, a bifurcated system where you have the Chinese sort of developing countries of the world led by Beijing, however nominally, and now Russia as well joining that sphere, versus the developed countries, which are very much declining and they're aging and they're really not doing so well. Yes, we have a lot of upfront cash, but how deep is our economic capacity? Well, as we're seeing with what's going on in the American economy, it's not so good. And if we don't get it right with these bank bailouts, or if we default on our debt, as we're probably going to do this summer with the debt ceiling fight in Congress in the United States, that's only going to add fuel to this fire that Beijing has started, in which they're trying to basically divorce the world from the U.S. dollar, divorce the world from America's economic hegemony, because they realize if they can create a new system, a new economic model that's led by Beijing, they've basically stunted or weakened the American military threat, because our military only is as effective as our economy will allow it to be, will fund it to be. And so if China and Russia can get together and use energy as the beginnings of this new system, they're going to do that. Already Vladimir Putin, I think it was yesterday, announced that he wants to start trading oil in yuan, Chinese currency, that he wants to start doing more with Chinese currency. And we're all laughing about it here in the West, but big things have small beginnings. And as the American economy declines and looks less and less attractive, and as we use our economic superiority to go after Russia with sanctions, a lot of the developing world doesn't like that. And they're looking to China to shield them from potentially suffering some similar fate to what these other rogue states have suffered in the last 15, 20 years. So America's really hoisted itself by its own petard.
As you've mentioned, Russia is now part of China's empirical ambitions, and you've said that the communist regime needs the Ukraine war to drag out so that it can fuse China and Russia's economies for its own expansion goals. Could you unpack that for us?
Yeah, well, basically, we went into Ukraine thinking that Ukraine, with our help, would bleed the Russian army in the field now so that we wouldn't have to fight them possibly in the next 10 or 15 years, the Russians. Well, the Chinese are looking at Ukraine the same way, except on the other side. They're saying, hey, look, we can break Russia. The Americans and NATO can break Russia's army in the field. That makes Putin more dependent on Beijing. That means Beijing gets access to all that raw material, all of that resource resources that Russia is sitting on, notably in the Russian Far East that's sparsely populated. And hey, also, China might be able to get the Americans and NATO to completely break their backs trying to break Russia, and so much so that when the time is right, we in China can go into Taiwan and not expect much unified resistance from the West, because they've completely wasted that time, resources, money, and possibly eventually lives fighting the Russians in Ukraine, that, hey, the Chinese can walk all over Taiwan. Or also, we have to be watching out for North Korea initiating a conflict on behalf of China with South Korea. And we also, I think, and this is the basis of my next book, The Shadow War, coming out, Iran might start a world war in the Middle East very, very soon. And all of that's going to do is distract the Americans and break us, overstretch us, so much so that when China does decide finally to invade Taiwan, we can't do anything even if we wanted to.
And so what do you think the U.S. needs to do now to protect its power?
Well, it's an unpopular opinion, but the U.S. needs to seriously withdraw from Ukraine. I think that we need to encourage our friends in Poland to send a very large force to Polonize Galicia. That's Western Ukraine. Basically, the Russians went in wanting to destroy any semblance of a Ukrainian independent state. They've already achieved that objective. It's a question of whether it happens now or in another 6 months. It's going to happen. And so we need to draw a real line of control in Ukraine, and the Poles need to be the ones to do it. And we need to tell the Russians, hey, look, you can have Eastern Ukraine, you can have Crimea. You've had it since 2014 anyway. You've had Crimea longer with the naval base there, but you're not taking Western Ukraine, and we will put a NATO force directly there so that if you do start something, we're going to have to go to war over that. I don't think Putin wants to go directly to war anytime soon with NATO. So I think he might take that deal. I think also this is something that Putin suggested to the Poles in 2010, and they didn't go for it. Understandably, this is not a good idea. This is the only idea we have left, short of going to nuclear war now with Ukraine. And so that's what we need to do, because we need to be able to rededicate our forces and our time focusing on the Indo-Pacific and focusing on containing Iran. And we can't do that if we're so overcommitted as we are in Ukraine. This thing is going to keep escalating. Russia's all in. They're not just going to quit.
All right. Brandon Weichert, thank you so much. Senior editor at 1945.com and author of Winning Space, How America Remains a Superpower. Great to have you on.
Thank you.